The great crystal towers of Nexus Prime stretched into the void like frozen lightning. Inside the largest tower, the Galactic Senate chamber buzzed with activity. Representatives from 1,000 different worlds filled the massive hall. Some floated in gas bubbles, others skittered on multiple legs, and a few glowed with their own inner light. At the center of it all stood Galaxy King Zethkalar. His body was made of living crystal that caught and threw back the light from a dozen suns. When he spoke, his voice carried through both sound waves and quantum frequencies that every species could understand. Today his crystalline form pulsed with satisfaction. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Zethkalar began, his words ringing through the chamber. "Today marks a great day for civilization. Today we officially declare the human species extinct." A wave of relief swept through the assembled creatures. The Kalarian delegation's feathers ruffled with pleasure. The silicon-based Vex collective hummed in harmony. Even the ancient ethereals, who rarely showed emotion, flickered with what might have been joy. Zethkalar raised one crystal arm, and a holographic display appeared above the chamber. It showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. Earth, the human homeworld, was completely destroyed 3 cycles ago. Our hegemony fleet made sure no life remained on its surface. The last human colonies were eliminated shortly after. Every ship, every settlement, every trace of their species has been wiped clean from the galaxy. Senator Krelthos, a large insect-like being with armor plates covering his body, clicked his mandibles in approval. He had personally commanded some of the fleet actions against human colonies. "Good riddance," he said, his translator converting his clicks into words. They were too violent, too unpredictable. They refused to follow proper diplomatic procedures. Other senators nodded in agreement. Ambassador Luxara, whose people communicated through color changes in their skin, flashed patterns of deep blue satisfaction. They were a threat to galactic peace, her translator announced. Always ready to fight instead of talk. Dr. Vexiani, one of the few voices that had ever spoken in favor of studying humans rather than destroying them, sat quietly in her delegation section. The Kalarian scientist kept her feathers flat against her head, saying nothing. She remembered the humans she had met during first contact missions. Yes, they were aggressive, but they were also curious, creative, and surprisingly protective of other species they considered friends. Zethkalar continued his speech. "The human seat in this chamber will be removed. Their records will be archived as a warning to future species about the dangers of unchecked aggression. The galaxy is finally at peace." The chamber erupted in celebration. Crystalline beings chimed like bells. Gaseous entities released clouds of pleasant-smelling chemicals. Aquatic representatives splashed in their containment tanks. The sound was overwhelming, a symphony of relief and joy that echoed through the crystal halls of Nexus Prime. "Let this be remembered," Zethkalar declared above the noise, as the day civilization finally triumphed over barbarism. As the celebration continued, maintenance crews moved to remove the empty chair that had once belonged to humanity's representative. It was a simple seat, made of metal and fabric from Earth. Compared to the elaborate floating platforms and environmental chambers used by other species, it looked almost primitive. The workers lifted the chair and carried it toward the storage areas. As they walked through the corridors, something strange happened. The lights flickered. Not the controlled, patterned flickering of normal system cycling, but an irregular, almost random pattern that made the shadows dance on the walls. One of the maintenance crew, a small gray being called Pip, noticed that the temperature sensors were acting oddly. In some corridors, the readings jumped up several degrees for no reason. In others, they dropped so low that frost began forming on the walls, despite the station's perfectly controlled environment. "Must be a system glitch," Pip's partner said, adjusting some controls on a wall panel. But when they checked the environmental systems, everything showed normal readings. Deep in the station's lower levels, automated security drones began reporting unusual activity. Movement in areas that should have been empty, energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. When security teams investigated, they found nothing but empty corridors and storage rooms. In the main computer core, the station's artificial intelligence began receiving data that didn't make sense. Sensor readings from areas that didn't exist on the station's blueprints. Audio pickups detecting sounds that resembled wind through trees, even though no trees existed anywhere on Nexus Prime. Dr. Vexani left the celebration early. Something about the whole situation bothered her. As she walked through the corridors toward her quarters, she passed a section where the lighting seemed dimmer than usual. The air felt different too, though she couldn't explain how. She remembered conversations she'd had with human researchers during the early contact period. They had told her stories from their world, tales they claimed were just fiction but which seemed to carry unusual weight. Stories about old women who lived in forests, who protected children and punished those who harmed innocents. Stories about justice that came not from laws or governments, but from something older and more fundamental. One story in particular stuck in her mind. A human scientist named Dr. Chen had told her about something called Baba Yaga, an old woman who lived in a house that walked on chicken legs, who could appear anywhere she was needed, and who always made sure that evil people got what they deserved. Just stories, Dr. Chen had said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But sometimes stories have a way of becoming real when people need them to be. At the time, Vexani had dismissed it as human superstition. Now, walking through corridors that felt somehow different from how they had that morning, she wondered if there might have been more truth in those stories than anyone had realized. Back in the Senate chamber, the celebration was winding down. Representatives were returning to their quarters or preparing to leave for their home worlds. The great crystal towers of Nexus Prime began to dim as the station shifted to its night cycle. In the empty chamber, where humanity's chair had once sat, a small maintenance drone noticed something odd. The floor where the chair had been was slightly warm, though no heat source was present. When it scanned the area, its sensors detected trace amounts of organic compounds that shouldn't exist in the sterile environment of the station. The compounds were plant-based, similar to wood and leaves and herbs. They reminded the drone's simple AI of forests, though it had never seen a forest and didn't understand why the comparison came to mind. As Nexus Prime settled into its night cycle, strange things began happening throughout the station. Doors that had been sealed for maintenance were found standing open. Corridors that should have led to storage areas seemed to stretch longer than they should. In the air recycling systems, filters began detecting impossible things: the scent of burning wood, the smell of cooking food, and something else that the computers couldn't identify, but that seemed familiar and terrifying at the same time. The Galaxy King retired to his private chambers, satisfied with the day's work. The galaxy was finally clean of the human infection. Order and civilization would prevail. As he powered down his consciousness for the night cycle, Zethkalar felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He didn't notice the shadow that moved independently across his chamber wall, or the soft sound of footsteps that came from nowhere and went nowhere. He didn't hear the faint whisper that seemed to carry on a wind that couldn't exist in the vacuum of space. But somewhere in his crystalline dreams, Zethkalar found himself in a dark forest, where an old woman was stirring something in a large black pot, and the trees whispered of justice and consequences. 3 days after the great celebration, strange reports began flooding the security office of Nexus Prime. Senator Vordak, a tall blue creature with multiple eyes, complained that his dreams were filled with visions of burning forests and screaming metal. He woke each morning feeling like he had been running through smoke. "It's probably just stress from the excitement," the security chief told him, but privately the chief was worried. Similar reports were coming in from senators across the station. The hegemony delegation reported that their sleeping quarters felt unnaturally cold, despite the environmental controls showing normal temperatures. Ice formed on their breathing apparatus during the night, and their beds were often covered with frost by morning. When maintenance teams checked the environmental systems, everything appeared to be working perfectly. Dr. Vexani couldn't sleep at all. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard an old woman's voice humming a tune she didn't recognize. The melody was simple but haunting, like a lullaby that had been twisted into something else. When she opened her eyes, the humming stopped, but she could swear she smelled herbs and wood smoke in her sterile quarters. The station's artificial intelligence was having problems too. Security cameras showed shadows moving in ways that didn't match the objects casting them. In some recordings, figures appeared in the background that vanished when the AI tried to focus on them. The computer kept detecting movement in areas where no life signs were present. "There's something wrong with the sensor grid," Chief Engineer Boltar reported to Galaxy King Zethkalar. The stocky, rock-like being gestured at his datapad with frustration. "We're getting readings that don't make sense. Energy signatures that appear and disappear. Temperature fluctuations in random locations. And the strangest thing, We're detecting Earth-based plant compounds in the air recycling system. Zethkalar's crystal form darkened slightly. That's impossible. Earth was completely destroyed. No Earth materials exist anywhere in this sector. I know, sir. That's what makes it so strange. The compounds are definitely organic, definitely plant-based, and the computer identifies them as similar to Earth vegetation. But they keep appearing in sealed areas where no plant life should be able to survive. In the lower levels of the station, maintenance crews reported increasingly bizarre incidents. Worker Pip and his team found entire sections that had somehow changed overnight. Corridors that used to lead to storage bays now opened into areas that looked like forest clearings, complete with trees and undergrowth. When they brought security teams to investigate, they found only empty storage rooms. "I swear it was there," Pip insisted to his supervisor. "Real trees, real grass, even birds singing. And there was this smell like someone was cooking soup nearby." The supervisor checked the records. The storage bay had been sealed for 2 years and contained only spare parts for mining equipment. But when they opened it, the room smelled faintly of vegetables and herbs, as if someone had indeed been cooking there recently. Senator Krelthos was having the worst time of all. The insect-like warrior who had led many of the attacks on human colonies found himself experiencing things that his rational mind insisted were impossible. His food dispensers had begun serving him meals that tasted like ash and bitter tears, no matter what he ordered. When he demanded new equipment, the replacement dispensers did the same thing. Worse still, his quarters seemed to be changing around him. He would go to sleep in his familiar chamber and wake up in a place that looked almost the same but felt completely different. The walls seemed older, more worn. The air tasted of smoke and sorrow. And sometimes, late at night, he heard an old woman laughing somewhere in the walls. Dr. Vexani decided to investigate the stories she remembered from her conversations with human researchers. She accessed the archived human databases, looking for information about their folklore and mythology. What she found made her feathers stand on end. The humans had stories about creatures they called archetypes, powerful symbols that existed in the collective unconscious of their species. According to their theories, these archetypes could sometimes manifest in physical reality under extreme circumstances, especially when the emotions behind them were strong enough. One name kept appearing in the files: Baba Yaga, an old woman from human folklore who lived in a house that walked on chicken legs. She was described as both a helper and a threat, someone who tested people and gave them what they deserved. Those who were kind and innocent received help. Those who were cruel and evil received punishment. The files contained detailed descriptions that made Vexani's blood run cold. Baba Yaga was said to have iron teeth and eyes like burning coals. She could travel anywhere instantly, appearing wherever she was needed. Most importantly, she was supposed to be the protector of children and the punisher of those who harmed innocents, mythological. Guardian activated in response to species-wide trauma. One human scientist had written in a theoretical paper, "Collective unconscious may manifest archetypal figures when survival of the group is threatened." Vexani realized with growing horror that the complete extinction of humanity might have been exactly the kind of species-wide trauma that could trigger such a manifestation. Meanwhile, the incidents on Nexus Prime were getting worse. Security teams found rooms that had been completely transformed overnight. What should have been equipment storage was now something that looked like the inside of an old cottage, complete with a fireplace and a large black cauldron. When they brought Galaxy King Zethkalar to see it, they found only an empty room with standard station walls, but the smell lingered. Herbs and spices and something cooking, something that made the assembled aliens think of home and comfort and protection, even though none of them had ever experienced exactly those scents before. The computer systems were also acting strangely. The AI reported conversations happening in areas where no one was present. When security investigated, they found empty corridors, but the audio pickups continued to record what sounded like an old woman talking to herself, muttering in languages that the translation systems couldn't identify. "Getting warmer in here," the voice would say. "Time to check the pot. They'll be ready soon." Ready for what? No one knew. Senator Krelthos stopped eating altogether after his food began tasting like the burned remains of the human colonies he had destroyed. Every meal reminded him of the orbital bombardments he had ordered. the screams that had come through the communication channels before they went silent. He tried eating in different locations with different equipment, but the taste never changed. His reflection in mirrors began showing things that weren't there when he looked down at his own body. Burns across his armor plating, scorch marks that glowed faintly red. His multiple eyes sometimes appeared damaged in the reflections, weeping fluid that looked like molten metal. Dr. Vexani brought her research to Galaxy King Zethkalar, but he dismissed her concerns. "Superstition," he declared, his crystal form pulsing with annoyance. "Human mythology has no power here. They are extinct. Their stories died with them." But even as he spoke, Zethkalar felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. His own dreams had been troubled lately, filled with images of an old woman stirring something in a pot while she hummed a tune that sounded like a funeral song and a lullaby combined. That night, as Nexus Prime settled into its rest cycle, the strange incidents reached a new level. Entire sections of the station seemed to exist in two states at once: the familiar sterile corridors of a space station, and something else that looked like a forest cottage where an old woman worked over a fire, preparing something that would soon be ready. And in the shadows between realities, footsteps could be heard walking slowly but deliberately toward the Senate chamber, where those who had celebrated humanity's extinction slept uneasily in their beds. The disappearances began on the 7th day after the proclamation. Senator Grixnell, a floating jellyfish-like being, who had voted enthusiastically for humanity's extinction, was found missing from his environmental tank. Security teams searched the entire station but found no trace of him. His tank showed no signs of forced entry, no damage to the seals, nothing to suggest how a water-breathing creature could have left his enclosed environment. 3 days later, they found him sitting peacefully in the station's library, somehow breathing air despite his aquatic biology. He had no memory of the past week and spoke only in whispers about needing to confess something important. When questioned, he began listing coordinates of civilian refugee ships his fleet had destroyed during the human war. They weren't military targets, he kept saying, his translator making his alien words sound hollow and haunted. Just families trying to escape. Children, so many children. Galaxy King Zethkalar ordered increased security, but the disappearances continued. Senator Thexera vanished from her sealed quarters during the night cycle. Ambassador Coldrum disappeared from the middle of a diplomatic meeting, his chair simply empty when the others looked around. Each time, security found no evidence of how they had left or where they had gone. The missing senators were always found eventually, but never where they should be. Some were discovered in cargo holds that had been sealed for years, sitting calmly among boxes of supplies with no memory of how they got there. Others appeared in maintenance shafts too small for their bodies to fit through, or in rooms that required multiple security clearances to access. All of them showed the same symptoms when found: complete memory loss for the time they were missing, and an overwhelming compulsion to confess their crimes against humanity. They spoke of refugee ships destroyed, of colonies bombed without warning, of surrender offers ignored in favor of total annihilation. Dr. Vexani worked frantically to understand what was happening. Her research into human mythology had revealed disturbing parallels to their current situation. In human stories, Baba Yaga didn't just punish evil people by killing them. She made them face the truth of what they had done, forced them to confront their crimes before deciding their fate. "She's testing them," Vexani explained to Chief Engineer Boltar. According to human folklore, Baba Yaga would often capture wrongdoers and make them understand the full consequences of their actions before determining their punishment. Boltar's rocky features showed skepticism. "You're saying an imaginary human witch is kidnapping our senators?" "Not imaginary," Vexani corrected. "Archetypal. There's a difference. The humans believed that their collective unconscious could manifest these figures under extreme circumstances, and what could be more extreme than the complete extinction of their species? The station's AI was reporting increasingly impossible readings. Sensors detected the presence of Earth-origin plant life growing inside the station's walls, not just traces of organic compounds, but actual living vegetation that somehow survived in the vacuum of space. Maintenance teams sent to investigate found corridors lined with trees that shouldn't exist, their roots growing through metal walls that showed no damage. In one section, they discovered a garden that occupied a space larger than the entire section, according to the station's blueprints. At the center of the garden stood a small cottage with smoke rising from its chimney. When security teams approached, the cottage and garden vanished, leaving only empty corridors and the lingering scent of wood smoke. The most disturbing reports came from the lower levels, where the station's power cores were located. Workers there claimed they could hear someone cooking in the reactor room. When they investigated, they found their sophisticated fusion reactors replaced by a large stone fireplace, with a black iron cauldron hanging over the flames. The cauldron bubbled with something that glowed like stars and smelled like justice. Impossible, Galaxy King Zethkalar declared when shown the security footage. But even as he spoke, his crystal form flickered with uncertainty. His own experiences were becoming harder to explain away. Every night, Zethkalar found himself dreaming of the same forest clearing. An old woman sat by a fire, stirring her pot while she hummed an ancient tune. She never looked directly at him in these dreams, but he could feel her awareness of his presence. Sometimes she would speak, though not to him. Almost ready, she would say to the fire, "Need to check if they understand what they've done. Can't serve justice until they truly know." Senator Krelthos had stopped leaving his quarters altogether. The insect warrior who had personally led the bombardment of Earth was too terrified to venture into the corridors. His room had begun changing around him in ways that defied explanation. The walls showed images of the human colonies he had destroyed, playing the scenes over and over like a memorial to the dead. His food dispensers now served him nothing but ash and water that tasted of tears. When he tried to override the system, it served him the same thing. When he brought in emergency rations from outside his quarters, they transformed into ash the moment he tried to eat them. Worst of all were the visitors. Late at night, he would hear scratching at his door. When he looked through the security viewer, he saw nothing. But when he turned around, an old woman would be sitting in his chair, stirring something in a small pot that she had placed on his desk. She never spoke to him directly, but she would mutter to herself as she worked. "This one led the fleet that burned their homeworld," she would say, tasting whatever she was cooking. Ignored 3 surrender attempts. Targeted the schools and hospitals first. Very bitter, this one's guilt. Needs more time to simmer. When Krelthos tried to speak to her to demand answers, she would look up with eyes that seemed to hold the light of dying stars. "Not ready yet," she would say, shaking her head sadly. Still thinks it was justified. Still believes might makes right. Back to the pot with you. And Krelthos would find himself somewhere else, sometimes in a forest clearing, sometimes in what looked like the ruins of a human city. He would be forced to walk through the destruction, to see the bodies, to read the names of the dead carved into memorial walls that stretched beyond the horizon. Dr. Vexani made a breakthrough when she discovered a hidden partition in the human databases. It contained files that had been encrypted with what the humans called mythic protocols, information that was supposed to only become accessible under specific circumstances. The files revealed that human mythology wasn't just stories. It was a form of cultural DNA, a way of encoding behavioral patterns and moral frameworks that could survive even the physical destruction of their species. The stories were designed to manifest as protective mechanisms when humanity faced extinction-level threats. They knew this might happen, Vexani realized with growing awe and terror. They built their stories to protect them even after death. Baba Yaga isn't just a mythological figure. She's a justice protocol encoded in the collective unconscious of anyone who ever heard human stories. The implications were staggering. Every species that had encountered humans, every diplomat who had learned their languages, every soldier who had fought alongside or against them, they all carried fragments of human mythology in their minds. And those fragments were now activating, bringing the stories to life. As if summoned by this realization, the lights throughout Nexus Prime began to flicker in a pattern that seemed almost like Morse code. The air recycling system filled the corridors with the scent of herbs and spices and something cooking over an open fire. In the security office, alarms began sounding as sensors detected the impossible. Someone was walking through the sealed corridors of the station, moving steadily toward the Senate chamber. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like those of an old woman carrying something heavy. But when security teams rushed to intercept the intruder, they found only empty corridors and the lingering scent of wood smoke. The footsteps continued, always one section ahead of the search teams, always moving toward the place where Galaxy King Zethkalar and the remaining senators waited. In the shadows between reality and story, an old woman smiled and continued her steady walk toward the heart of galactic power, carrying with her a justice that had been cooking for 7 days and was finally ready to be served. The remaining senators huddled in the central chamber of Nexus Prime like prey animals sensing a predator. Half their number had either disappeared or fled the station entirely. Those who stayed did so because they were too afraid to leave, convinced that whatever was hunting them would follow them anywhere in the galaxy. Galaxy King Zethkalar had activated every defensive system the station possessed. Energy shields crackled around the Senate chamber in layers, each one powerful enough to stop a battleship's main cannon. Temporal stabilizers hummed at maximum power, designed to prevent any form of dimensional intrusion. Psychic dampeners created a null field that should have blocked any supernatural influence. The chamber looked like a fortress preparing for siege. Armed security forces stood at every entrance, their weapons charged and ready. Sensor grids monitored every cubic centimeter of space, alert for the slightest anomaly. Environmental controls had been locked down to prevent any external infiltration. "Nothing can get through these defenses," Chief of Security Vexmac declared, his multiple arms gesturing at the various systems. "We have protection against every known form of attack, physical, energy-based, psychic, dimensional, even mythological if such things really exist." Dr. Vexani sat in the observers section, her feathers drooping with dread. Her research had revealed the terrible truth about human mythology, but she knew the others wouldn't listen. They still believed they could fight stories with technology, defeat legends with logic. "You don't understand," she had tried to explain to Zethkalar. "Baba Yaga doesn't break through defenses. She simply arrives where she needs to be. In human stories, walls and locks and weapons mean nothing to her. She appears wherever justice is required." But the Galaxy King had dismissed her warnings. Now they all waited in their fortress of technology and power, believing themselves safe from an old woman's tales. The first sign that their defenses meant nothing came at exactly midnight station time. The massive doors of the Senate chamber, sealed with locks that would take a fleet's worth of firepower to breach, simply opened with the gentle sound of a cottage door swinging on old hinges. The energy shields didn't flicker. The sensors didn't detect any intrusion. The temporal stabilizers showed no dimensional breach. The doors just opened as if they had never been locked at all. Through the doorway walked an old woman. She looked exactly as the human stories had described her, bent with age but strong in spirit, wild gray hair that moved in a wind that touched nothing else, wearing simple clothes that seemed to shift between the rough dress of a peasant and robes woven from starlight itself. Her eyes held the depth of space between galaxies, ancient and knowing and terrible in their kindness. In her gnarled hands she carried a large wooden spoon, still steaming from whatever she had been stirring. The assembled senators recoiled in terror, but their legs wouldn't carry them away. Security forces raised their weapons, but their fingers wouldn't pull the triggers. The defensive systems continued to hum and crackle around the chamber, completely unaware that their protection had already been bypassed. Baba Yaga walked slowly among the senators, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber despite the sound dampeners. Where she passed, the advanced alien materials began to show their age. Metal corroded, crystal clouded, and the sophisticated chairs and platforms that held the representatives started to creak and sag, as if centuries were passing in seconds. She moved between them like a grandmother checking on sleeping children. But these children had been very, very bad. "So many here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of every human story ever told. The translation systems couldn't process her words, but every being in the chamber understood her perfectly. So many who celebrated the death of innocence. So many who thought might made right. She stopped beside Ambassador Luxara, whose skin had turned a pale, frightened white. "This one voted to destroy the refugee ships," Baba Yaga said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Families with children fleeing the war zones. Military necessity," she called it. Luxara tried to speak, to protest, but found she could only nod in admission of her crimes. Baba Yaga continued her slow circuit of the chamber. "And this one," she said, pausing beside Senator Vordak, "ordered the bombing of human medical facilities. Red Cross symbols meant nothing to him. Healers and patients all the same to his weapons." Her wooden spoon dripped something that glowed like liquid starlight onto the chamber floor. Where the drops fell, images appeared, scenes from the human war but shown from the perspective of the victims. Children crying for parents who would never answer, Doctors trying to treat the wounded while bombs fell around them. Families holding each other as their worlds burned. They told stories, you know, Baba Yaga said, stirring her spoon through the air, as if the chamber itself was her cauldron. Even as you destroyed them, they told stories. About justice. About protection. About old women who come when innocents are harmed. She reached Galaxy King Zethkalar, who stood frozen at the center of the chamber. His crystal form had lost its inner light, becoming dull and gray with terror. "And you," she said, looking up at the towering alien with eyes that held the accumulated grief of an extinct species. "You who proclaimed their death as civilization's triumph. You who removed their empty chair as if they had never existed at all." Zethkalar tried to activate his emergency protocols, to teleport away or call for help, but nothing responded. His technology, his power, his authority, all of it meaningless in the presence of something that existed beyond such things. "Do you know what humans call justice?" Baba Yaga asked, her voice gentle as a lullaby and terrible as a funeral dirge. "Not revenge. Not punishment for its own sake. Justice is making things right. Justice is ensuring that those who harm innocents understand the full weight of what they have done." She gestured with her spoon, and the chamber filled with voices. Not the voices of the living, but of the dead. Every human who had died in the war spoke at once, their words overlapping into a chorus of sorrow and accusation. "We tried to surrender," they said. "We offered peace. We showed you our children, our art, our dreams, and you chose extinction." The senators began to weep, though many of their species had no tear ducts. The weight of their victims' voices pressed down on them like the gravity of a collapsing star. But humans were aggressive, Zethkalar managed to whisper. They were violent, uncontrolled. They threatened galactic peace. Baba Yaga nodded sadly. Yes, they were aggressive. When their children were threatened. Yes, they were violent. When innocents needed protection. That is what you never understood. Their aggression was not conquest. It was love. She raised her spoon and the chamber filled with new images. Humans dying to protect alien refugees. Human soldiers sacrificing themselves to save civilians of species they had never met before. Human parents adopting orphaned alien children and raising them as their own. They were not perfect, Baba Yaga continued, but they were protectors. And when you destroyed them, you destroyed the galaxy's guardians. Now the protection falls to older powers, to stories that have teeth, to justice that wears a grandmother's face. The old woman looked around the chamber at the terrified representatives of 1,000 worlds. I am here to offer you a choice. The same choice humans offered you, which you rejected. You can acknowledge what you have done. You can work to ensure it never happens again. You can build a galaxy where the strong protect the weak instead of destroying them. She paused, letting her words sink in. Or, she continued, you can face the full justice of every story humanity ever told. Every myth of protection and vengeance. Every tale of the powerful being brought low. Every nightmare about what happens to those who harm children. As she spoke, shadows began moving at the edges of the chamber. Not ordinary shadows, but shapes that suggested other figures from human mythology. Things with burning eyes and bloody hands. Things that punished evil and protected innocence with methods that made Baba Yaga seem gentle by comparison. Choose quickly, the old woman said, settling into what had once been humanity's empty chair. It transformed around her, becoming a simple wooden seat beside a fireplace that now flickered where the chamber's center had been. My pot is still cooking, and I have many more visits to make tonight. Galaxy King Zethkalar fell to his knees before the simple wooden chair, his crystal form cracking under the weight of understanding. Around the chamber, other senators began to collapse as well, their various forms of alien physiology failing them as the full truth of what they had done crashed down upon them. We didn't know, Zethkalar whispered, his voice barely audible. We thought we were bringing peace to the galaxy. Baba Yaga stirred her wooden spoon through the air, and more images appeared around them. Not scenes of war this time, but of what had come after. Alien children kidnapped by raiders with no human rescue ships to save them. Refugee camps overrun by pirates with no human peacekeepers to protect them. Weak species crushed by stronger ones with no human mediators to stop the violence. Peace? The old woman asked gently. Look around you. Count the wars that started after humans fell silent. Count the species that have been enslaved since their protectors were removed. This is your peace? Dr. Vexani found her voice, speaking from the observers section where she had watched everything unfold. The Kethran slave trade increased by 400% after humanity's extinction. The Torvan expansion wars began 6 months later. 3 peaceful species have been completely absorbed by aggressive neighbors in the past year alone. Baba Yaga nodded approvingly at the Kalarian scientist. This one paid attention. This one remembered that humans fought not for conquest but for justice. Tell them what you learned, little bird. Vexani's feathers trembled as she stood. Humans weren't just a species. They were an idea. The idea that the strong should protect the weak. That aggression should serve justice, not self-interest. When we destroyed their bodies, we thought we had eliminated a threat, but we had actually removed the galaxy's conscience. The old woman smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face into something almost kind. Clever bird, but incomplete. Tell them what humans really were. Vexani looked around the chamber at the broken senators and the flickering shadows that suggested other mythological figures waiting in the wings. They were storytellers. Everything they did, everything they believed, it all came back to stories. Stories about heroes and villains, about justice and protection, about what happens to bullies and what happens to those who help others, and what happens to stories when their tellers die. Baba Yaga prompted. They don't die, Vexani realized, her voice growing stronger. They spread. Every species that encountered humans, every being that learned their languages or heard their tales, we all carry pieces of human mythology now. Their stories live in our minds, in our cultures, in our children's bedtime tales. Baba Yaga clapped her hands together once, and the sound echoed through dimensions that had no names. Exactly. You cannot kill stories by killing storytellers. You can only make the stories angry. She stood from the wooden chair and walked to the center of the chamber, where her fireplace crackled with flames that burned in colors that had no names. The iron cauldron hanging over the fire bubbled with something that looked like liquid starlight mixed with tears. Humans are not extinct, she announced, her words carrying to every corner of the galaxy through means that no technology could track. They have simply evolved beyond the need for flesh and bone. They live now in every story told about justice, in every tale of protection, in every myth about the powerful being held accountable for their actions. She gestured with her spoon, and the chamber filled with new voices. But these were not the voices of the dead. These were the voices of children from 1,000 worlds, all telling the same story in their own languages. The story of an old woman who protected innocence and punished evil. The story of Baba Yaga, now part of galactic folklore. You wanted to eliminate humanity's influence, the old woman continued. Instead, you have ensured that human values will spread to every corner of the galaxy. Every child who hears my story will learn about justice. Every parent who tells the tale will remember that the strong should protect the weak. Senator Krelfos, who had been silent through the entire confrontation, finally found his voice. What? What do you want from us? Baba Yaga ladled something from her cauldron into a simple wooden bowl. The liquid inside glowed with warm light and smelled of hope and second chances. I want you to choose. You can continue as you were, ruling through fear and might. If you do, I will visit you again, and next time I will not come alone. The shadows at the edges of the chamber stirred, and for a moment the senators glimpsed other figures from human mythology. A man with a hammer who protected the innocent, twin brothers who punished oathbreakers, a woman with a sword who stood between the weak and those who would harm them. Dozens of archetypal protectors all waiting to manifest if needed. Or, Baba Yaga continued, you can learn. You can remember what humans tried to teach you before you silenced them. You can build a galaxy where the strong lift up the weak, where justice matters more than power, where stories end with heroes protecting those who cannot protect themselves. She offered the bowl to Zeth Kalar. This is the choice humans offered you before you destroyed them. The same choice I offer now. Drink and commit to building something better. Refuse and face the justice of every human story ever told. The Galaxy King looked into the bowl and saw reflected there every choice that had led to this moment. Every vote for violence over peace. Every decision to choose power over protection. Every time he had looked away when the strong crushed the weak. But he also saw possibilities. Images of what the galaxy could become if the lessons learned here were taken to heart. Alien children playing safely in streets protected by just laws. Refugee ships welcomed instead of destroyed. Strong species using their power to uplift weaker ones instead of dominating them. With shaking hands, Zeth Kalar accepted the bowl and drank. The liquid tasted of tears and hope. of sorrow for what was lost and determination to do better. One by one, the other senators followed his example, each drinking from the bowl and accepting their responsibility for building a better galaxy. When the last senator had drunk, Baba Yaga nodded in satisfaction. Good, now you understand. Justice is not punishment for its own sake. Justice is making things right. She began to fade, becoming translucent like smoke from her own fire. I will be watching. We all will be watching. Every time you tell a story, every time you make a choice between power and protection, remember this night. Remember that some things survive death, and some justice comes wearing a grandmother's face. As she disappeared, her final words echoed through the chamber. Take care of each other. That's what humans would have wanted. The Senate chamber returned to normal, but everything had changed. The defensive systems still hummed, but they seemed pointless now. The weapons still functioned, but no one wanted to use them. The representatives looked at each other with new eyes, seeing not rivals for power, but fellow beings who shared the same small galaxy. Galaxy King Zethkalar stood slowly, his crystal form now glowing with a different light. I hereby rescind the Extinction Proclamation, he announced, his voice carrying to every world in the galaxy. Humanity is not extinct. They live on in our stories, in our choices, in our commitment to justice. He looked around the chamber at the senators who had shared this transformative experience. We will establish new laws, protection for emerging species, rights for refugees, consequences for those who choose might over right. And we will tell the story of this night to our children, so they remember that some things are more important than power. Dr. Vexani smiled as she watched the Galaxy King sign the new accords. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their aggression. It had been their stories, their ability to plant ideas that grew in other minds and change the way people thought about right and wrong. As news of the new Galactic Accords spread, something wonderful began to happen. Children on 1,000 worlds started telling new stories, tales of brave humans who protected the innocent, of justice that could not be killed, of old women who appeared when heroes were needed most. And in every telling, humanity lived again, not as a biological species, but as an idea that would spread throughout the galaxy and beyond. The idea that the strong should protect the weak, that justice matters more than power, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with stories that refuse to die. In quiet corners of the galaxy, parents tucked their children into bed with tales of Baba Yaga and the lessons she taught. And somewhere in the space between story and reality, an old woman smiled as she stirred her pot, watching over a galaxy that was finally learning to take care of itself.